We all understand this on a smaller scale when it comes to changing seasons, right? We know that nature doesn't operate in straight lines. As spring turns into summer, the temperature doesn't rise incrementally every day. It might be warm on April 1st, then snow on April 8th. But no one doubts that August will be hot. And we see this with climate change too. Temperature pulses higher, then levels off, then pulses again. But choose the right 8 years to analyze and you'll see a downward trend. 2016 was 1.19 degrees above pre-industrial levels, and 2022 was only 1.07. For reference, the Paris Agreement aims to keep the global average temperature rise between 1.5 and 2 degrees Celsius. Even inside that range, we may hit some very disruptive tipping points, including the loss of coral reefs.
So we wanted to talk about the ongoing abrupt climate change and its impacts on marine systems, most notably the Great Barrier Reef, where you've been more than once. And I think you haven't been recently because you want to save your tears for another day. Is that about right?
Yeah, that sums it up. A few years ago, a scientist that I know, she called me on Skype and said that she was going to go and dive on the Great Barrier Reef, and she was apprehensive. And then she called me back a couple of days later and she couldn't stop crying, talking about it.
Wow. And she'd had a break from you, so you weren't the source of her tears.
But this is an important part of the story, the grief of it. In the 2016 El Nino, the Great Barrier Reef got absolutely hammered in its worst bleaching event in history. And it takes about 15 years for a reef to recover from a bleaching event. So obviously it's never going to get a recovery time. But I noticed that a lot of the scientists who were interviewed about it, they were on the brink of tears and they held them back. You know, there's a famous scientist that you and I have been following for over a decade, Dr. Natalia Shakova. And when she was interviewed by Nick Breeze about the methane threat in the East Siberian Arctic shelf, she teared up. And that became a really focal point about, you know, people could see that she was visibly moved by the circumstances. And I think we should show that more. We're all grieving, you know, in this, what I've heard you call this grief-denying culture.
Right.
Everyone's bottling it up and, you know, getting cancer instead of getting the tears out of their system.
Right. And in this culture, we are discouraged from the day we're born to not express negative emotions. You know, big boys don't cry. How many thousand times did I hear that when I was a kid? And so it's difficult to overcome those cultural barriers and actually act like human beings. One of the most important things I learned in taking the grief recovery workshop was that it's okay and that we should encourage other people to express their negative emotions as well. You know, everybody's happy for you when you express positive emotions. Yay. And then the way to keep those people happy is to never express negative emotions, to bottle it up, as you say.
An abrupt permafrost thaw, but no one lives in an average.
Every continent in the world is warming, but the rate of change of that warm can differ from place to place.
So where is warming fastest and where is warming the slowest? There are two big picture factors at play: latitude and oceans. First, high latitudes in the far north are warming fastest, largely because of sea ice. As temperatures rise, sea ice melts, exposing dark water that absorbs more solar radiation, which causes more warming, and the cycle continues.
And that's not healthy in so many ways.
I think it's also a bourgeois privilege.
Yeah, absolutely. And
toxic positivity, it's become a science.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I hear very frequently that if I just am more positive instead of being so negative, then I'll have a better life. Really? Really?
Yeah, that's what some of the dinosaurs were saying to the other dinosaurs as they watched the meteorite coming. Oh, don't be so negative, Kevin.
Yeah. Those dinosaurs had a bad day.
Yeah, our bad day is coming. You don't have to, it's not hard to see it. Just look up.
Well, right. And even the IPCC admits that we are in the midst of an abrupt climate event. How abrupt? I'm gonna quote from their October 8th, 2018 report, Global Warming of 1.5 degrees. Even abrupt geophysical events do not approach current rates of human-driven change. What that means is the environmental change that happened that caused the dinosaurs to go extinct was not as rapid as what we're doing to the planet. That's amazing. You know, the collective power of humanity is truly astonishing.
One report I saw said it that we're emitting the equivalent of 7 Hiroshima bombs of energy per second.
Right. Yes.
But I want to mention, which isn't mentioned nearly often enough, although it has been mentioned recently because of the extraordinary, rapid, off-the-charts increase in ocean surface temperature, which is called sea surface temperature. So ocean heat has been mentioned more than before. What the fossil fuel, what I call cancerous economy, is doing is it's adding heat to the climate system, adding heat to the oceans, because most of the heat goes into the oceans at a rate of, wait for it, 10 Hiroshima atom bombs per second. And it's at least 10 per second. Other references say it's even higher. But that's, of course, absolutely insane. And it's 30 years. It's hard to believe this. It's 30 years since the 1992 United Nations Climate Change Convention was signed, and all governments agreed that this was a big problem and it was a serious problem, that they were going to act on it. So in that 30 years, what's happened? Well, certainly nothing has happened with respect to dealing with the problem, because we have emissions at an all-time record high right now. So nothing's happened there. The climate science has been very, very busy. They've been publishing a lot of papers. They've been doing more and more monitoring, more and more complex, high-tech, sophisticated monitoring in the oceans, up in space, on the land, everywhere. And what that confirms over the 30 years is simply, and of course I've watched it over 30 years, unfortunately, it just confirms that in ever finer detail and ever more certainty that we are heading and we're bringing about the collapse of the biosphere. That's what's going on, and I have presented on that several times, and all of these indicators, which are getting worse faster than ever, show that we're on a rapid trend of biosphere collapse.
Continues. Now, the cycle won't continue forever. Once enough sea ice has melted, this Arctic amplification will slow down and the Arctic will warm at a rate more similar to the rest of the globe. But for now, if you're farther north, you're probably warming fast. Second, water reflects more of the sun's energy than land does, and it has a far higher heat capacity. So it takes a lot more energy to raise ocean temperatures than land temperatures. That means our large continents are warming faster than the oceans. And guess what? That's where humans live. Put this together and you get this generalization. Large land masses in the north are warming fastest. Most of the Earth's land masses are in the mid-latitudes and northern hemisphere, so those regions are warming faster than southern regions. But which continents are warming the fastest? Europe is the fastest warming continent at 0.47 degrees Celsius of warming per decade since 1980, and Asia comes in a close second. Globally, there are some unusual hotspots as well. A mysterious pocket off the coast of Uruguay and Argentina has warmed twice as fast as the global average, causing algae blooms and mass die-offs of marine species. There also seems to be a similar hotspot in the North Atlantic along the coast of Delaware to Maine. These hotspots seem to be largely driven by shifting ocean currents that bring warmer water to unlikely places.
This is an excellent example of how studying climate cycles can help us prepare and foster human survival, not just on this world, but potentially on other worlds too. Because one of the fascinating aspects of the ENSO is the level of insight we gain from it into Earth's complex climate systems. Understanding the interconnectivity of our own planet's climate will be crucial if we ever want to settle on other planets or even terraform. If humans eventually undertake the huge task of terraforming Mars, Mercury, Venus, or the Moon, or perhaps even an exoplanet in some other part of the Milky Way galaxy, our success will likely depend on our ability to understand the various inputs and feedback loops that intricately interlink climate systems and biospheres. That day may seem far off, but it isn't too early to start dreaming. So, there we have it. An in-depth primer on the El Niño Southern Oscillation. The ENSO can be a very destructive cycle for our planet's animal and human populations, but life is nothing if not adaptable. Likelier than not, 2023 will add another piece to the growing body of documentation about these events. How has El Niño or La Niña affected you? Have you noticed any interesting changes in your part of the world? I'd love to hear about it in the comments.
A lot of people I know think that's a good thing. Look at how powerful we are.
And see, people keep ignoring the lag between emissions and consequences.
Right.
A consensus that a lot of us have thought about, since you and I have been talking about this together for over a decade, was that it takes somewhere between 1 and 3 decades for all the emissions to work their way through the system. But it's more complex than that. Huge pulses of carbon, i.e. entire forests burning, that can take centuries to work its way through the system. So the amount of lag and the amount of heat that's in the pipeline already is phenomenal. Even Dr. James E. Henson, the grandfather of climate change, even he admits that 10C is baked in with existing emissions and what he strangely called slow feedbacks. I don't know. I struggle with slow feedbacks.
Oh, yeah. Henson, it's really, really difficult to figure him out. You know, he called my idea of near-term human extinction crazy, in one word, crazy. And then he indicates that we're going to attack on 10C in the not too distant future, although he makes sure that that's beyond the lifetime of his grandchildren.
When we first started talking about this, the mainstream media were always referring to how bad it's going to be in 2100.
Right.
And then those goalposts got moved to 2050. So it's going to get really bad in 2050. The cognitive dissonance around this whole subject is phenomenal. Where the whole culture is like a deer in the headlights.
Right. And there's a paper that was published in 2016 in Global Geochemical Cycles, which is not exactly the National Enquirer. It's a peer-reviewed paper, a renowned peer-reviewed journal. And that paper found that the ocean is well on its way to suffocating due to deoxygenation by 2030. By 2030.
Well, that was like a kick in my guts.
You know, and this is from 2016. That's from 7 years ago. It ignores aerosol masking, of course, because nobody ever talks or writes about aerosol masking. It ignores self-reinforcing feedback loops, of which we've triggered many. Even the IPCC admits that we have triggered a self-reinforcing feedback loop. which nobody talks about anymore, right? You never see the corporate media talk about abrupt or irreversible climate change, much less both in the same sentence.
Since the Kyoto Protocol, all the NGOs were talking about how important it was for us to avoid tipping points. None of them ever mention that term anymore. It's
Right.
just like Michael Mann and his hockey stick. You know, him and his colleagues came up with the theory, which I support 100%. But miraculously, Michael Mann can't see it anymore.
Right. And he was the lead author on that paper, published in 1990. He went on to have at least one child. And so he wrote about what became known as the hockey stick, the unbelievably rapid increase in global average temperature in 1990. And now he can't see it. He's doing fine, though.
Yeah. It's phenomenal how the scientific reticence that is being shown everywhere. And people say, oh, you know, you guys are exaggerating. No, I think what it is that so few people are prepared to put their hand up and say, we were wrong. We underestimated climate sensitivity.
And foremost among those people unable to raise their hands are academics. Academia depends upon you. To succeed in academia, you have to have an ego, a really serious ego. I know better than most people. That's how you succeed, is because you have self-confidence that indicates you can get through this, whatever this is. And so, of course, academics have huge egos. It's what got them there.
Yeah, I just can't believe, though, that people like Michael Mann is prepared to look into the camera and barefaced lie.
Yeah,
he's so used to talking to a dumbed down audience, and don't take offense, anyone, about what I mean by that he thinks that he can get away with it. He said recently, and he's reiterated it time and time again, so it wasn't as if it was a slip up. He said that if we stop emissions, the warming will stop.
Oh. And he's got to know about aerosol masking. He has to, or he's not a climate scientist. I recognize it's the best kept secret in climate science, but James Hansen has written and said many times that it'll take about 5 days for the aerosols to drop out of the atmosphere and contribute to very rapid warming. 5 days. So you can't tell me we can stop emissions today, and then in a week, it's going to be all better. It's going to be all cooled off. No. Latest work says 55% increase in global average temperature. That's huge. We're already at above 2. As Andrew Glickson points out in his October 9th, 2020 book, The Event Horizon. In fact, I think it's the abstract for chapter 5, which you can find online with ease. Look for The Event Horizon by Andrew Glickson, and you'll see that he writes, during the Anthropocene, greenhouse gas forcing has risen by more than 2.0 watts per meter squared, equivalent to more than 2 degrees C above pre-industrial temperatures. So we're beyond 2, and everything I see, sadly, I'm still on one social media channel, LinkedIn, which is allegedly the professional channel, and every day, about 10 times a day, I see somebody write that we have to hold it below 1.5 or we're in real trouble.
Yeah, it's just so ragingly dishonest to say that to the young people.
Right.
This is where it inflames me the most. We've got to deal with our grief, and we've got to deal, more importantly, with their grief, but we can't deal with theirs if we're not confronting our own. But to lie to them at this point, you know, I've got friends who I love dearly whose children are going to university to study law and academic, you know, economics and bullshit like that.
So what is the world economy agenda? You know, it's the world economy that determines everything. The agenda is to burn all the fossil fuels. That's the agenda. The evidence is overwhelming that that's the intent and that's the agenda and that's the plan. And so what's going to happen? Well, of course, our planet is going to go downhill ever faster. And so what are they going to do then? They're going to geoengineer. So the agenda is to keep burning fossil fuels as fast as the world economy and the banking corporations and the fossil fuel corporations can make happen, on the pretext that we can fix the climate with geoengineering. Absolute nonsense. So that's what's been happening, you know. Okay, back to, I should mention, and the media were good on this one, that at one time we had 4 heat domes. 4 heat domes spread across the northern hemisphere. And those heat domes are not only cause extreme heat, but they cause extreme heat to last a long time. So the big thing then, the big terrible news is that we have methane feedback. As I said, Greenpeace was worried about that many, many years ago. One thing that the media have also followed and the scientists have advised us about over and over is that this explosive, what I call explosive increase in atmospheric methane is due to wetlands. Now that's really bad because that's feedback. So that's the thing that we've been dreading for decades. And in actual fact, the experts said with their models that we didn't have to worry about until sort of the end of the century. Well, it's here, and it's here big time.
Because, you know, we still smile, we still laugh, we know what's coming. Edward Abbey, Southwestern American public speaker and writer, wrote, "The fear of death follows from the fear of life. A man who lives fully is prepared to die at any time." And he died relatively young, by the way. He was younger than we are when he died. And he lived fully. Here was a human being who pursued adventure, the likes of which I almost never see. And I understand that a lot of people have commitments to other people in their lives. Once you have children, then maybe pursuing adventure becomes a little bit more difficult. And certainly most people I know are interested in pursuing a career a lot more than they're interested in pursuing adventure. But come on, folks, you only get one turn at this. This is not a dress rehearsal.
It's so phenomenal for me when I hear people talking about their careers and their plans for the coming years, plural. I have to stop my eyes physically rolling around in my head when I'm listening to it, because that comes across as being rude or arrogant or disrespectful, or, you know, categorize it however you want. But I'm obliged to talk about it and mention it, because, you know, it's like watching someone walking towards a cliff, listening to their favorite music, and you don't want to disturb the song.
Right. Yes. You know, it was through the 60s and the early 1970s that medical doctors decided that the ethical approach is to tell terminal patients that they're terminal. And the analogy is obvious. Climate scientists, media personalities, government officials, none of them are talking about abrupt, irreversible climate change. How could they not? It's clearly serving as an existential threat right now. The rate of change is happening too fast for vertebrates to keep up. We've known that for 15 years based on peer-reviewed literature. Mammals can't keep up either, and nobody talks about us being vertebrate mammals, and therefore we might not be able to keep up with the rate of environmental change.
Aerosol masking effect. There's been a spectacular example of how potent it is that's unfolded this year. there's new regulations come in for shipping about what levels of bunker fuel they can use. And immediately after that, we had a spike, a sea surface temperature spike that I think is directly related to the loss of those aerosols. Not only that, of course, it's only one more contributor to it, but there's no question in my mind. Out in the oceans, there's less pollution, more long wave radiation getting through and heating up the oceans.
Right. And this is huge because the ocean is basically a battery. That's where we're storing heat and greenhouse gases. And along comes the El Nino Southern Oscillation that's underway right now, that we know is underway. If it's a significant El Nino Southern Oscillation, we're going to break the temperature record by a long way since the Eocene. So that's a long time. That's before any civilization existed on this planet.
The El Nino is really nascent. The Bureau of Meteorology in Australia haven't completely committed. They're still on El Nino alert. No, but the point I make with that is that people are saying that all this chaos is a result of the El Nino. No, it's not.
No, absolutely not. Are you kidding me?
Yeah.
It's just getting started.
Yeah, we won't know the full effects of this El Nino until late or the end of the Southern Hemisphere summer. So I don't think we'll see the full effects of it until March, April, something like that. Right. So, that's 6 months of broiling we've got ahead of us.
Right. And that's the beginning of the growing season in the Northern Hemisphere. So I would argue that that's just the beginning of the biological impact. So we have significant changes that show up in February, March, April. That's going to change everything about plant life and therefore animal life.
Yeah, so that will disrupt industrial civilization because we'll be fighting over who's going to get the last morsels of food to eat. So, that's another reason why we're going to have another war, because there's less food, and the normal process for dominant civilizations is to take it from the neighbor.
Right. Yes, another reason for another war and another reason for me to eat more ice cream while I can. I think that's what you're saying.
Yeah. You didn't need to point that out. Everyone took that as a given.